There will no longer be a risk of entrusting responsible posts in our states to our brother Jews. We shall put them in the hands of persons whose past and reputation are such that if they disobey our instructions, must face criminal charges or disappear. That is in order to make them defend our interests to their last grasp. That's very interesting. It's talking about blackmail, isn't it?
Yeah, right.
Protocol 9, we have taken control of the institutions of the Goyim using the chaotic license of liberalism. We have got our hands into the administration of the law, into the conduct of elections, into the press, into the liberty of the person, but principally into education and training as being the cornerstones of a free existence. Protocol 10. How indeed are the Goyim to perceive the underlying meanings of things when their representatives give the best of their energies to enjoying themselves? Protocol 11. We shall keep promising them to give back all the liberties we have taken away as soon as we have quelled the enemies of peace and tamed all parties. It is not worthwhile discussing how long they will be kept waiting for the return of their liberties. Protocol 12. The majority of the public have not the slightest idea what ends the press really serves. Protocol 13. We further distract the masses with amusements, games, art, sport, from questions in which we should find ourselves compelled to oppose them. Protocol 14. Our wise men trained to become leaders of the Goyim will compose materials which will be used to influence the minds of the Goyim, directing them towards such understanding and forms of knowledge as have been determined by us. Protocol 15. We hasten the death of those who hinder our affairs. Simple as that. Protocol 16. We shall swallow up and confiscate to our own use the last scintilla of independence of thought. We will turn the Goyim into unthinking, submissive brutes waiting for things to be presented before their eyes in order to form an idea of them. Protocol 17. In our programme, 1/3 of our subjects will keep the rest under observation from a sense of duty on the principle of volunteer service to the state. Protocol 18. We have broken the prestige of the Goy kings by frequent attempts upon their lives through our agents, blind sheep of our flock, who are easily moved by a few liberal phrases to crimes, provided only they be painted in political colours. Protocol 19. I hope we have succeeded in preventing the Goyim from adopting this means of contending with sedition. This means to taint it with some larceny or sexual abuse, and 2, to make a severe example of one offender. Protocol 20. Economic crises have been produced by us for the Goyim by no other means than the withdrawal of money from circulation. So they're talking about an orchestrated financial collapse there. Protocol 21. In our hands is the highest power of our day, gold. Surely there is no need to seek further proof that our rule is predestined by God. All right, so that's a flavour anyway. As I say, people can read more if they wish. All right, then. So let's now. Should we go back in time right the way to 1776? Right. To the Illuminati movement. Because obviously the word Illuminati. Let's just deal with that first. The actual word, because it has multiple meanings. A lot of people use the Illuminati just to describe the New World Order or those who are controlling the planet, and it's a word which is tainted, I think, when it's used in a general sense.
Well, let's realise that it had a total historical meaning at the end of the 18th century with the brilliant mastermind Adam Weishaupt. He was in Bavaria. He was the son of a rabbi, and the Rothschilds were funding him, and he set up this terrifically potent new movement which posed as sort of benefactors to humanity, rational enlightenment, and it was about the dissolving of all belief, all governments, all nation states, undermining of all existing establishments. And it then got banned by Bavaria about a decade after it was founded, and it went underground into the Freemason, first 3 levels of Freemasonry, and it persisted in a underground kind of manner, went into, say, America through Freemasonry, and world leaders started getting very alarmed. What is this new power? And I would say it's terribly important to understand that the French Revolution was actually caused by these Illuminati agents.
So just a question before you go on to the French Revolution, Nick. So Freemasonry was well established by 1776, is that right?
It had a different character then. It was just about, masons, builders. It was very fashionable. It was about the divine architect. It didn't have the very sinister connotation which it then came to have as this new element went into Freemasonry.
But was it still ran by keeping secrets and that kind of thing? Was it still a secret organisation?
Yeah, it was totally secret. It was all male club, totally secret. And then this Illuminati became the particular type of Freemasonry that then developed.
Right.
And it's important because the protocols specifically say, we brought about the French Revolution, and we know the people who did it. And it is within, as it were, living memory of the French Revolution that the protocols were composed. This is a very important precursor, the ability of hidden Illuminati agents to undermine a state like that. Mm-hmm. So historically, I would say the Bavarian Illuminati is a central component of what then became the we, the frightening, all-powerful we in the protocols. Who are the we? And that they are top-level Freemasons. They are the old Illuminati. They are Talmudic Jews. They are international bankers. And these kind of work together in this frightening we of the protocols.
Right. So 1789 is the French Revolution. So you would say, without any doubt, the protocols must have been written after 1789 because it's referring to the French Revolution. So just tell us how this small group managed to orchestrate the French Revolution.
Oh, well, I'm not really a historian, Richard. I can't really go into that. But academic historians will totally dismiss this claim. They'll say that's just a conspiracy theory. Right. So I think it's terribly important for viewers to evaluate whether they want to believe this or not, that underground, hidden current from the strictly banned Illuminati in Bavaria, they did bring about this event. I feel there's enough evidence that did happen. And that is then followed by the next stupendous event after the Napoleonic Wars. The Rothschilds take over the Bank of England. Mm-hmm. Okay? So one family dynasty gets awesome power that no family on this planet had ever had before, takes over the Bank of England, and then the French, also the French currency, these come to be in effect owned by the Rothschilds with stupendous wealth.
So the Bank of England was set up in 1694, and you're saying that it effectively, who was controlling it changed in 1815. So how
I am,
how did that come about?
Well, it was again a detailed story of in the wake of the Napoleonic conquest. A Rothschild posed as having came to England. He had early news from a pigeon carrier, and he posed as if Britain had lost the war, and everybody started selling. And he bought while others were selling. Right. But I'm just a science historian, Richard. Don't ask me details about European history like this. I'm just giving you the overall sketchy background, why I think the protocols were composed around about 1830 or 1840. Mm-hmm. And it was in the wake of these tremendous events that a dynasty came to have power over national currencies, and the idea of being able to manipulate states by external debt, which they wouldn't be able to repay. That was a quite new concept, which is central to the protocols.
Right. So 1815, Rothschild gains control of Bank of England. What about the other European countries, and with regards to their banking?
Yeah, a few years later, the same happened in France, and so you had international ministers of economics coming to the Rothschilds for loans and to help with their finances. And I'm saying that is the situation which enable the protocols to be conceived by the great mastermind who was at the Mizraim Lodge in Paris. So this was a Rothschild, and he was giving a sequence of lectures, and he had top economists listening to him.
Right. Now, there's a book written by Maurice Joly, who you've mentioned, entitled Dialogues in Hell.
Yeah.
So we know when that was published, 1864.
Yeah.
Right. So just give us a background to that book.
Well, everybody agrees that these two texts copy off each other. One is copied from the other because there's overlap. Nearly 1/6 of the protocols overlap with the Maurice Joly book. And whenever you hear, oh, it's just a forgery, they always have the claim that the story is that the secret police of Russian secret police go to France. For some reason, they want to whip up anti-Semitism. Why is not disclosed. And they have the totally bizarre concept how to do it by going to France, in Paris, finding the Maurice Joly book, which has been confiscated, and there may not have been any copies in Paris then. They may have had to go to, I don't know, Istanbul or somewhere to find a remaining copy. And they then copied off that book to produce the protocols in French. It was written in French, and then take it back, and somebody has to retranslate this thing written in French, back to Russian. So I would say this is a story that makes no sense on any level whatsoever. But that is the story of it being a fraud.
Am I right in thinking that the protocols themselves are a lot more extensive than what Joly wrote in Dialogues in Hell?
Yeah, Joly's book has nothing about anti-Semitism. I think it's got anything about Jews in it, actually. He was himself a Jew, and he was in the same Mizraim Lodge, so he's a Freemason. So he's bound by oaths of secrecy, what he's allowed to say. And he said, I would say the meaning of his book, Dialogues in Hell, it's terribly important to read the preface of it, where he explains what the book's about, and the terrible new thing he's seen, which, if I may just read these words, because this is always ignored. I would say he's in a state of despair because he's seen the early draft of the protocols, right? And not just that, but he experiences something which is working in the body politic, and he can't see anything that can stop it. And it's within his living memory that it began. That's what he said. I'll just read out. One political system in particular has not varied in its methods for a single day since the unfortunate and, alas, already too far away date of its inauguration. So the plan, the protocols, has begun, right? The supernatural duration of certain successes in this field is furthermore intended to corrupt honesty itself. So whatever's happening is so powerful and potent that he almost feels that it's supernatural. But the public conscience yet remains, and the heavens will one day interfere in the games being played against it. So he feels as if heaven itself is needed to stop this plan, whatever it is. Then about some years after composing this text, he commits suicide. So he's in kind of despair. He writes this text to try and tell people what he can about it, but he's not allowed to say more. So I would say he's a person who's seen the early draft of the protocols, and it doesn't make any sense to put it the other way around.
Because if you think about it, the method, let's say it's a genuine document, the method by which it's been discredited is a method similar to those methods explained in the protocols.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I.e., it was just done to discredit us. We're going to blame them over there.
The discrediting happened synchronously. 1920-21. Suddenly all the different countries had articles. New York, Paris, London, claiming, it's just a forgery, and giving it a weird and extremely unlikely story about how it's forged. And as you say, that is showing the methods which given in the protocols, yeah. The protocols are composed in two sections. It's terribly important to understand. We've looked at the basic composition, the whole stupendous 24-fold argument, and I'm saying it as one genius brain composed that, and it has to have been early in the 9th century, not later. Everyone says, composed at the end of the 9th century. Well, there are bits in the protocols, such as referring to the metro in Paris, about it. But those are cosmetic additions, okay? The first Zionist Congress in Basel, as if it was being polished up for that, And certain editions, he refers to some people, politicians have some stain on their character, some Panama. So Panama was some debacle in French politics recently happened at the end of the 19th century, okay? Mm-hmm. So those are slight additions, and possibly the title, Protocols of Zion, possibly that title is added. But the all important thing to understand is that the whole focus of international Judaism at the end of the 19th century was Zionism. That was the big issue. That's what the whole Congress was about, to try and get home for Jews, right? And the protocols got not a word of Zionism in them, not a word, okay? So they were composed at a much earlier time, before the great dream of Zionism had blossomed. That's why they cannot possibly have been composed at the end of the 19th century. So I would say we need to have these two phases in mind of the basic composition and then slight touching up additions at the end of the 19th century.
Okay. And because it didn't appear in English until 1920, but we'll come on to that because we've got a few other things to cover first.
1894, you get the copying of the protocols. Somebody called Glinka, a Russian lady, gets someone in the Mizraim Lodge, pays him to copy the text, and she takes it over to Russia. And she then gets the translation. So that is when this top secret document gets smuggled out, and the guy who's copied it tries to escape, but it quickly gets bumped off.
So when the protocols go to Russia, they're written in French.
Yeah.
Someone in Russia translates them into Russian.
Yeah.
And then they're retranslated back into French. Is that right?
Well, translated basically into English.
All right.
But there was
from Russian into English.
Yeah. But it did also happen back into French, but the original, there's no trace of the original French document. That's part of the kind of paradox, because obviously the powers that be, or the powers described in the protocols, want in every way to destroy any evidence of the existence of this document. Mm-hmm. For example, a whole series of the protocols was published in issues of a Russian magazine right at the beginning of the 20th century, and none of those whatever still exist. They've all vanished.
Right. So they were published in Russian at the beginning of the 20th century. But they didn't appear in English until 1920. The owner of the Times newspaper was interested in them.
Lord Northcliffe, yeah.
Right. So
let's just say Sergei Nilus, a Russian monk, obtained his copy in 1901, and then he published his book about the Antichrist in 1905, which contained the Russian text of the protocols. That's the main text, and a copy of that now resides in the British Library, and that may be the only one left, as far as anyone knows. That copy in the British Library was then used for the English translation, of which you've got a copy there. Mm-hmm. Appeared in that published in 1923. But in 1920, the English-speaking world became aware of the protocols, and immediately the sort of mass media went into action saying, oh, it's just forgery, just a forgery, just a forgery. Mm-hmm. And this fellow you mentioned, Northcliffe, one of the most powerful people in Britain, he owned the Times and the Daily Mail. He wrote an article saying, well, what is the extraordinary prophetic power that these protocols have? Can we have some inquiry into where they came from? Because the main thing that struck everyone when they appeared in English was their prophetic nature, because the whole Bolshevik Revolution, it was evident that they had appeared totally following the instructions given in the protocols, okay? And anyone in communist Russia having a copy of the protocols, there was a death penalty, right? That was in place for about 40 years. So Lord Northcliffe called for an inquiry in an article, I think it was Daily Mail, into where these protocols had come from. What was the extraordinary knowledge knowledge of human nature they seemed to show.
And Northcliffe, do you know if he was a Freemason? Or was he Jewish?
No, he wasn't, no.
And so he wasn't Jewish and he wasn't a Freemason then?
Well, I don't know.
Right, okay, so he wants to investigate this, possibly to print about it in his newspaper.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that was almost the last statement printed in the British newspaper, which didn't say that there was a forgery. After that, it becomes mandatory to say it's forgery in everything published, okay? Mm-hmm. But he called for, and he obviously paid a heavy price for calling for that inquiry.
So what happened to him then?
Well, first of all, he lost control of his own newspapers. He was ousted. Then he was declared insane, literally, some medical report claiming that he was insane, and then he got bumped off by food poisoning very soon after.
Right.
So he quickly became another prime example of the policy expounded in the protocols of how to deal with opposition.
Yeah, anyone who gets in our way will be killed. That's what it says in the protocols.
Anyway, a bit like Henry Ford, he was the most powerful man in America. He published in the Dearborn Independent, serialised the protocols and commented a lot upon them, and he was one of the last people to say that they were genuine, right?
So what year would that be, Nick?
Well, it was early around 1920s, and he had to grovel with apology. He was made to apologise for having said that and retract it, which is
Henry Ford.
Quite extraordinary. The most powerful man in America.
I've got a quote from him here, Nick.
Right, yeah.
It is too terribly real for fiction, too well sustained for speculation, too deep in its knowledge of the secret springs of life for forgery.
Yeah, I think that's a very good quote about the protocols. That was the impact they made on him.
Now, the other clue, perhaps, it talks about control of the press, and we have gained control of the press, but it doesn't mention film.
No.
So
that's very important. Film was, 1870 or something, it developed. So at the end of the 19th century, anyone talking about use of the media and control of the media for public interest would obviously have discussed film. You couldn't have missed it out. And I think this is clear proof that it was composed at a much earlier date.
Right, so before 1864, within the lifetime of Maurice Joly, after 1815, because that's when we had the financial collapse that it speaks about.
Yeah.
So you think maybe, if you were to put a date on it, 1830 or something like that?
Yeah, 1830, 40, and there's a teetotal author, because he scoffs at the Goyim for drinking alcohol. So I would say I would agree with Henry Macau. This has to be a top Rothschild giving this with his tremendous financial knowledge and his belief in God's chosen people and so forth.
So we're not making a clear statement they're definitely a forgery or they were definitely a real book that was giving lectures on to higher-ranking Freemasons. But let's just say it was the second. Let's just say it is a real book, and it was used to pass this message or this knowledge down, and it's written, let's say, in 1835, for example. Right? So, can you identify who may have authored it?
Well, I was just saying,
if that's the era that it's written, who was around at the time that was.
I'm not sure, but one of the Rothschilds, Meyer, or one of them. He made a statement. Give me control of a nation's economy, and I care not who passes the laws. That he made that around 1830,
right?
And that is the kind of mindset of the author.
So let's just go down the line, and we're not stating that as a fact. We're hypothesising that it was a genuine document in order to roll out their policy, if you like, but in a secret way. So just paint the picture. Say this will be happening in Paris, Nick, would it? In some lodge.
Yeah. Secret. The Mizraim Lodge in Paris, and it was a top secret document.
So the kind of people that would be these very high level Freemasons would be economists and owners of newspapers. Just fill us in on what you think. Just describe the scenario as to what.
As you said, I mean, I don't know who they were, but they clearly were top economists who are referred to in the protocols, listening amongst the audience, and statesmen who would be listening to this. So it was a very elite audience, and Joly was there. He was in the lodge somewhat later time, and he would have seen that text. Yeah.
So do you think if there was people, let's say they're trying to influence Britain through this, the protocols, let's say, but it's all happening in Paris. So would there be Masons going over to Paris to receive these lectures, do you think? Or would someone come over and give lectures in British lodges? How would that work, do you think? Or is it just all completely secret, you don't know?
It's all completely secret, we don't know. But I think it's very reasonable to suspect that people would have wanted to hear a Rothschild speaking on these matters, yeah.
Right. And there may have been lodgers in the UK at that time that were preaching what's in the protocols. You think it's possible?
Well, this is all hidden, Richard. This is the whole thing. That
I mean, when were lodgers set up in this country? Do you know what the history of Freemasonry is?
Well, it was set up, 1717, the first British lodge. Mm-hmm. That's an earlier time than we're talking about, right. The London Lodge. But this new element permeated it like a century later, about a century after that. Mm-hmm. This new... was it Grand Orient Lodge it was called?
Now, viewers may remember Zaid, who was on the show, who has researched politics of the Middle East and Europe, and I asked him to give his opinion on the protocol. So I'll just read out, and then maybe you can comment on it. Yeah. He says, "I'm not sure if anyone actually believes the protocols were read verbatim in their published format at some congress of Jewish leaders.
No evidence of that. Yeah.
However, there is likely a spectrum of belief amongst interested parties, ranging from the mainstream assertion that they are wholeheartedly an anti-Jewish forgery to the belief that they are in fact a dramatized version of other genuine source material. Whatever the origins of the protocols, they do in fact describe so well the means that elites control societies, whoever we identify those elites to be. If we move away from the perpetrators discussed in the protocols to just the means of control described, which are provably true, if a significant number of the masses became aware of this information, it would be incredibly dangerous for those in positions of power. What is described in the protocols was going on longer than their purported creation, most certainly throughout the 17th, 18th and 19th centuries. The papers and media back then worked in much the same way as they do today, manipulating the masses. So in that sense, the protocols are not so revolutionary, yet remain an accurate, albeit generalized, expose of how the world really works. There are many truisms within the protocols, and comparisons such as the masses being like cattle is an accurate one. The mechanics of power that are utilized because of this is a reflection of this unfortunate state of human affairs.
Yeah.
So that's Zaid's comments.
Right. Well, I'm not disagreeing with anything there, but I feel if we get a historical account of the development through the 19th century, it's more helpful. May I perhaps add, Richard, that in terms of them coming out of France into Russia, that is so interesting and important. There's a son of Nihilus. Nihilus is the guy who published them, and he testified. There was a trial at Bern, I think 1935, somebody accused or trying to stop them publishing the protocol. So there was actually a trial in which a lot of stuff came out. And he testified that his father had received the original version in French. Mm-hmm. That he had received it and therefore presumably done his own translation. And I think that's important independent testimony from the son of the guy who published it, because what he published, his book, has never been translated into English. People have wished. That's one of the things people like Lord Northcliffe said, wouldn't it be a help if we could have an English translation of what Nihilus published, which it's impossible. Most things try and investigate the protocols. You just come up against a brick wall. No, you can't do it. No, we lost the text, and so on. So I think that's an important step of the argument.
Right.
And as I say, it's around 1894, that it happened of the protocols being taken over to Russia. And from then you begin to get people testifying and they've seen the original copy or an original copy, and there's more than one translation into Russian, and I think that gives a bit of historical depth, as I say. So this is immediately prior to the first International Congress.
And in Russia it was an immediate death sentence if you had a copy of this.
Totally, yeah, in Bolshevik Russia.
I think this is a reprint from the 1923 one. It says 1936. This is reprint, but I think it says here introduction 1922. So,
but can I just go over the unlikely nature of the forgery claim?
Yeah, absolutely.
This very profound document is allegedly composed by some Russian secret police, and it's alleged that they somehow wanted anti-Semitism to be whipped up in Russia. What were they trying to do? Who authorised them to do it? That's not made clear at all. And these secret police who are named don't have any special literary genius or facility, and they're supposed to have got hold of a book which was almost unobtainable, because this kind of satire or dialogue in hell of Jolly all copies were confiscated in France. Okay, Napoleon III confiscated all copies, and
so just to interrupt then, do you think that's because Napoleon III was linked to the Rothschilds and part of their lodge?
Well, it's said to be because he didn't like what was in it.
Right.
That's all we're told.
Okay.
Right. So first of all, why would they want to hunt for a book almost unobtainable? How would they know that they wanted that book? And when they got it, it hadn't got anything about anti-Semitism in it. It was a dialogue about a tyrannical political system. And why would they want to use that to compose this text? And then if they composed the text in French, if you imagine they did do it, why would they want to give it to an obscure Russian monk who'd have it in his possession for years, on the supposition that he might then translate it back into Russian? None of that story makes any sense. And people seem to have a complete mental blockage against trying to look at this. As a science historian, I feel we should try and look at the genesis and origin of the text, what we do know about it. And in a sense, the first clear evidence is from its appearing in Russia in different places. Different people testified having seen it. And it's evidently been smuggled out from Paris, I would say. And then within the text itself, I would say you've got evidence for it having been composed, by a supreme banker genius. That has to be one of the Rothschilds.
And it says that they're hidden. Our countersign is force and make believe. It mentions Darwinism as well.
Yeah, that's slightly satirical. This is one of the things added at the end of the 19th century, that one of the successes we arranged for Nietzscheism and Darwinism and Marxism to undermine the Goyim. Well, I don't think they did arrange for Darwin or Nietzsche. So that might be slightly satirical, and it might be used to. Well, it obviously has been used. People say that the whole thing is a sort of satire and so on. But I would say that's added in the 1890s, yeah.
Right, because it mentions science in its stating that they are going to define the science so that the Goyim can be controlled through that science. That's the interpretation that I got. That science is going to be in our hands.
Uh-huh.
And it gives Darwinism as an example of how it's science which is being used.
Well, the idea that they can control universities' teachings, in order to confuse and perplex the Goyim. Yeah, they do say that. Yeah,
this is unusual. Who and what is in a position to overthrow an invisible force?
Yeah, well, can I end on a note of hope here, Richard? A note of hope, right. The solution, if you've got an unseen controlling power, which you can't quite locate, you don't know who it is who's controlling you, the solution is just to stop having a financial system in which money is created out of nothing. But that's what gives the godlike power to these people, that they can print money whenever they want and charge you interest on it for just having the money. That's what started in 1694 with Bank of England, so-called Bank of England. And countries need a banking system. This is the worst crime, the most terribly punished crime in the modern world, having your own banking system which is not linked to international Rothschild finance. And that is the solution. And it's the only solution. As long as we keep with the finance we've got at the moment, you're giving unlimited power to the hidden ones who will always control you.
Well, there are only a few countries now left that aren't connected to the international banking system and are in debt to that system.
Yeah, what are they? North Korea.
Iran, is it? They're all the ones on the hit list.
Yeah, Iran, Cuba, Syria.
But it's in a situation where the momentum that they have with the world monetary system that they have.
Yeah.
How do you reform it and change it and actually get into a situation where the currency is originated as a credit for the people? It's not being loaned to a government.
Yeah, well, this is the power that the author of the Protocols claims it has, the dreadful we. It says the Goyim cannot organise themselves sufficiently to resist what we've done. It's completely dumb of them to allow us to give them money that charge interest at source, but they cannot get together sufficiently to oppose what we're doing.
Here's another way that I sometimes express it, Nick. It is not possible for a government, a sovereign government, to have any debt when its currency is a fiat currency, right? Because the sovereign government should be in charge of that currency and the issuance of that currency. So therefore, it's not possible for a sovereign government to have debt. It means it's not the government.
Right.
It means the government isn't really, our government is not really a government because it could write off its debt if it was a government, couldn't it? It could just print that money.
Yeah.
Right? It hasn't got the authority to. So your government, really, I would rename the government. Where the government is whoever is originating that currency. As the Rothschild said, give me a control of a country's money and I care not who makes its laws.
Yeah, and this is one of the key bits where the Jolly text overlaps with the protocols. And I could just throw in, they have 5% interest charged to nation states for international loans. And that's one thing that you find both in the Jolly text and the protocols. And as you say, that is a situation that is the technique of control. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And there are so many things, if you go away and read them, there are so many things, when you read them, you think it's happening today. They're clearly using the same, whoever's in control today are following principles in that book.
Yeah, that is what William Cooper says in that Behold the Pale Horse, that it is the blueprint for the 20th century. What's happening in the 20th century, that is the testament of authenticity of the protocols, that you can see what's happening in the 20th century. It was blueprinted there. People get that. You get the eerie sense of prophecy and foretelling when you read those texts.
Yeah, it's like this one, just very simply. Protocol 12. The majority of the public have not the slightest idea what ends the press really serves. Right. So that's written, let's say, 1830.
No.
Well over 100 years ago, approaching 200 years ago, someone's written that.
Yeah.
That the press is in the hands of an elite who are using it to manipulate the public. Nearly 200 years ago, the press was in someone else, in private hands, being used to manipulate the masses. It's not a new concept.
No.
And it's so much of what is set out is clearly being applied today.
Yeah, so I'd like to urge that without trying to grapple with the titanic issues of world control, world domination, that we allow ourselves to talk amongst ourselves on the origin and phase development of the protocols and the historical evidence of the sequence of where it came from, and instead of just having Illuminati generally as a very general term, we see it as a key progenitor of the protocols from the Adam Weishaupt genius through the Rothschilds controlling currencies. If we can allow ourselves to look at the phase development and the process that it went through, instead of just this knee-jerk thing, it's forgery. Oh, you're not anti-Semitic, you're not anti-Semitic. We just got these knee-jerk reactions that were given.
I heard Eric Pickles, Zaid's actually sent me the video. Eric Pickles, the Conservative Party saying that anyone who uses the word Zionism, we can infer that they're being anti-Semitic.
There is a quote in the protocols about how the use of anti-Semitism is essential for the control of our lesser brethren. That is remarkable, especially if you're trying to believe the official story that the Russian secret police composed it in order to generate anti-Semitism. The actual author of the protocols is saying that they need that to for the dynamic that they are setting in motion.
All right, and Nick, is there anything else that you want to add? Because we are going to do another interview with Nick where we're going to talk about his latest book. Just give us the title of your latest book, Nick.
Well, we come on to that tomorrow.
All right.
Yeah, don't blow my logic circuits talking about different things.
Right, all right. But we're going to cover some of
Perhaps quote Gilad Atzmon. That's a good quote.
Okay, yeah, we've not read this one. So, Gilad Atzmon, just tell us who he was or who he is.
Well, he's a well-known alto sax player and a philosopher. He used to be in the IDF Jewish Israeli army, and he's now sort of over here and generally a good fellow.
So he said, American Jewry makes any debate on whether the protocols of the learned elders of Zion are an authentic document or a forgery irrelevant. American Jews do control the world. Right, okay, so that's his quote.
Yeah.
All right, Nick, well, thanks very much for today's interview, and I look forward to do the next one tomorrow.
Now, I just want to make a few comments before we finish. Firstly, I apologise for the sound quality in that section. I accidentally deleted the audio files and I had to rescue the sound from one of the cameras. Now, I think Nick has put forward a strong case that the Protocols of Zion may have been a genuine document, albeit that the document would have had a different name when it was first written. If you read mainstream websites like Wikipedia, you don't get any of the discussion provided by Nick today. All you get is a statement that the document is a forgery, whatever that means. And as Bill Cooper pointed out in his book, a very strong case can be made that the underhand practices outlined in that document are very similar to, or a blueprint for what is going on today. Remember, believe none of what you read, including on Wikipedia, and only half of what you see. I'm Richard D. Hall. Good night. Welcome to Rich Planet TV. I'm Richard D. Hall. This week's guest has just finished his latest book entitled Now is the Only Thing That's Real, a re-examination of the Manson murders, motives and mythos. What is myth and what is fact in the story of Charles Manson? What are the true motives behind the murders and who was really involved? There are many books covering this topic. Yet very few have broken through the trials, prosecutors and the news media at the time. This book includes hundreds of hours of research into court and police documents, witness statements, media reports and interviews with those involved. How do Terry Melcher, Elvis Presley, the Beach Boys, Jane Fonda, the Mamas and the Papas, Michael Caine, Dean Martin, Angela Lansbury, Peter Sellers, Warren Beatty, Yul Brynner, Peter Falk, Cary Grant, Steve McQueen, Neil Young, Frank Zappa, Nancy Sinatra, Ronald Reagan and Debbie Harry fit into the tale? What Hollywood secrets did the industry, the police and the prosecution strive to keep hidden? Were the victims really chosen at random by a crazed cult of serial killers high on a mix of LSD, Satanism, and the music of the Beatles? Read on to discover the secrets of the Manson family, their trial, the main players in the case, and the murky world of Hollywood. And here's the author, Neil Sanders. Welcome, Neil.
Thank you very much, Richard.
Right then, fascinating choice of subject matter. You've obviously spent a lot of time over the last, few years looking into this. Now, just one first thing to point out, this is some work. It's 560 pages, and it's quite a small typeface as well, Neil.
Oh,
so
yes.
I don't know how many words is in this. It took
It's
me
about 220,000.
220,000 words. We actually had to postpone the interview because I hadn't finished reading the book. So there's a lot of detail in here. Now, before we talk about it, there's a few things I want you to point out to help understand the background to the time of Charles Manson, the late 60s. Just tell us what is Haight-Ashbury and, in general, the hippie movement of the 1960s, a little bit about that place and what was going on there.
Sure. Haight-Ashbury is a district in San Francisco where essentially quite a lot of people who would be termed hippies sort of collected and gathered. This became sort of a focal point for this new movement, which was essentially a sort of an anti-authoritarian based off the back of the anti-war movement, obviously because Vietnam was going off in the time, and sort of after the emergence of the teenager, basically people were sort of rejecting mainstream society, rejecting sort of the paths that have been gone down by their parents, and looking at more sort of expansive sort of ideas about, inclusive society. This was, it's a very, very sort of like troubled time in as much as there was a lot of new civil rights movements, there was a lot of new student type movements, and a lot of people looking for equality from every aspect of society. And obviously there was a lot of people that were trying to sort of prevent that. The hippie movement sort of sprung out of a collection of sort of musicians, artists, and expressive thinkers that basically, as I say, rejected this and decided to come together in areas like the Haight-Ashbury. And there's a lot of festivals, things like Woodstock and Altamont later. There was the Be In Festival and various things like that. But it was an incredibly tumultuous time, to be quite honest. Like, I mean, for example, whilst people were, I think there was 30,000 people met at the Be In Festival in 1967. But at the same time, 30,000 young Americans were basically getting ready to launch an offensive in Vietnam in Operation Cedar Falls. So there was this incredible sort of dichotomy of love and hate, even though 1967 was actually called, and is still termed as the Summer of Love because of all these emergent ideas and such like that. It's also called the Long Hot Summer, because there was 159 race riots in America in that year alone. And these were serious race riots. We'd seen the murder of Malcolm X, the murder of Martin Luther King, the demonization of the Black Panther organization, the emergence of the SDS, and then later into the Weather Underground, who were essentially terrorist organizations, the Weather Underground. They decided to have a campaign of unannounced bombing and terror actions against the state, in order to, get their point across. Right.
Now, Haight-Ashbury was a place where a lot of very famous people lived, because we've got the Hollywood aspect to this as well. Just tell us a little bit about that.
About Haight, or
about who was living there in terms of
there was a lot of
famous
communes.
people.
I mean, one of the things was there was a group called the Diggers, who was essentially people who felt that you didn't need. They were like almost like freegans, or sort of sort of travellers, that type of thing. But obviously they just stayed in this area in San Francisco. San Francisco was obviously just a bit south from Hollywood or whatever. So basically it's a bit separate from Hollywood. So it was an area whereby people who weren't as wealthy as those in Hollywood, in Laurel Canyon or in Beverly Hills or whatever, who were also sort of experimenting with drugs, experimenting with free sex, experimenting with new ideas and new race relations and that type of thing. Haight-Ashbury was an area in San Francisco, and it attracted a lot of musicians, a lot of the sort of like what would become known as the hippie music of that time.